Max Carter had it all. Millions of followers, brand deals, and a reputation for pushing the limits of online pranks. But when he humiliated a quiet street performer by hurling ice cream onto his head, Max expected another viral hit. Instead, justice struck back instantly. The crowd turned, the cameras kept rolling, and before he could laugh it off, a firm hand yanked him backward. He was under arrest. Overnight, his empire crumbled, his fans turned against him, and his worst nightmare became reality. Cancelled. Humiliated and facing real consequences. This isn't just a story of a prank gone wrong. It's about the brutal price of arrogance in the digital age. Before we dive in, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. Max Carter strutted through the neon-lit streets of downtown, phone in hand, the blue glow reflecting off his smirking face. The notification counter on his latest post ticked upward by the second. Likes, comments, shares. He was untouchable. A king of digital chaos, living for shock, for the rush of instant fame. His last prank, where he fake proposed to a stranger in a crowded mall, had racked up 2 million views in less than 24 hours. But he needed something bigger, something meaner. "Yo, Max, what's the move?" his cameraman, Chase, asked. Adjusting the stabilizer on his rig, Max scanned the plaza, searching for the perfect victim. The Friday night crowd bustled with energy. Tourists, couples, kids eating ice cream, vendors hawking trinkets. Then he spotted him. An old man, dressed in worn clothes, standing at the corner with a violin tucked under his chin. His bow glided across the strings, filling the air with a soft, melancholic tune. A small tip jar sat at his feet, barely half full. Max grinned. "Gold mine," he muttered. Chase frowned. "What do you mean?" Max ignored him, marching toward a nearby ice cream stand. He threw a 20 on the counter. "Biggest cone you got." The vendor handed him a massive waffle cone, stacked with 3 scoops of melting vanilla. Max turned back toward the violinist, who was lost in his music, oblivious to the approaching storm. Chase hesitated. "Dude, this isn't a good look." Max scoffed. "Relax. It's just ice cream. It's harmless." He tapped Chase's camera. "Make sure you get the reaction." The bow slid gently across the violin one last time as the song came to an end. The moment the last note faded, Max lunged forward and smashed the ice cream onto the top of the old man's head. The crowd gasped. The violinist flinched, his hands trembling as cold cream dripped down his face, into his beard, onto his jacket. For a moment, he was frozen in place, his fingers still curled around the violin's neck. Max threw his arms up and laughed. "Chill out, Gramps. It's just a joke." But no one else was laughing. The entire plaza seemed to pause. The noise of the city, suddenly distant, drowned out by the sheer disbelief on the faces around him. People pulled out their phones, recording from different angles. Someone murmured, "What the hell?" A woman's voice cut through the air, sharp and disgusted. "What is wrong with you?" The violinist slowly lifted a shaking hand to wipe the ice cream from his face. He didn't speak, he didn't react. He just stood there, staring at Max with a quiet disappointment that cut deeper than any insult. Max's smirk faltered. Then, before he could say another word, a strong hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Turn around," a firm voice commanded. Max spun, still grinning, until he saw the uniformed police officer standing behind him. Max's grin faltered as the officer's grip tightened. "Hey man, what's the deal?" he said, trying to play it cool. His voice still carried that cocky edge, but his stomach had begun to twist. The crowd wasn't on his side. There was no laughter, no applause, just judgmental stares and murmurs spreading like wildfire. The officer didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gave Max a long, steady look, the kind that made it clear he wasn't playing along. "You think that was funny?" Max let out a nervous chuckle, shrugging. "Dude, it's just ice cream. It's not like I hit him." He motioned to Chase, who was still filming, though his hands had started shaking. "We're making content. It's harmless." The officer's jaw tightened. "Harmless?" He turned slightly, gesturing toward the violinist, who was still, wiping ice cream from his face, his bow hand trembling. The old man hadn't said a word, hadn't demanded anything. That made it worse. Max's confidence wavered. He had faced backlash before, angry comments, minor bans, maybe an occasional warning from a platform. But this was different. The energy in the air felt heavy, suffocating. The officer reached for his radio. "I need backup at..." Max's eyes widened. "Whoa! Whoa! Backup! Seriously? Come on, man, I'll apologize. No need to go overboard." He took a step back, bumping into someone in the crowd. The officer's voice was calm but sharp. "You just assaulted someone on camera." "Assault? Are you serious?" Max scoffed, though his voice had lost its usual bravado. He glanced around, looking for someone, anyone, who might come to his defense. But there was no one. Even Chase, who had always hyped him up, looked uncertain, his camera no longer locked on Max, but flickering between him and the officer. The violinist finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. It wasn't just ice cream. He looked Max in the eyes, and for the first time Max saw something worse than anger, disappointment. A new wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "He deserves it." Another person whispered, "Good, teach him a lesson." Max swallowed hard. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. The officer sighed. "Turn around." Max let out a nervous laugh, but his throat was dry. "You don't have to do this, man. I'm an influencer. Turn around." Max's body stiffened. He looked at Chase, silently pleading for help, but his cameraman just stared, unable to do anything. The realization hit Max like a brick, too. The chest. He wasn't above this. The officer yanked his arms behind his back, snapping cold metal around his wrists. The moment the handcuffs locked, gasps and cheers broke out in the crowd. And Chase, he kept filming. Max's heart pounded as the officer tightened the cuffs around his wrists. His arms ached from the awkward position behind his back. But that wasn't what made his chest feel like it was caving in. It was the eyes on him. The hundreds of strangers in the crowd, all watching, all recording, their faces lit up with the glow of their phone screens. This was his thing, capturing moments, making them go viral. But now, he wasn't in control of the camera. "Dude, stop filming!" Max snapped at Chase, his voice more desperate than he wanted it to be. Chase hesitated, but his hands stayed firm on the camera. He looked scared, but also detached, like he knew this was bigger than Max now. I don't know, man. People are gonna see it anyway." Max wanted to scream. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The joke had gone sideways, sure, but a slap on the wrist, a quick PR apology. That's how these things were supposed to work. Not this. The officer started guiding him toward the police cruiser parked at the curb. "You're under arrest for assault. You have the right to..." "Remain silent." "Oh, come on, this is insane." Max jerked against the officer's grip, but he wasn't going anywhere. "Assault? It was ice cream. You're acting like I punched the guy." The officer didn't respond. He just kept walking, his grip firm. Behind them, the violinist wiped the last of the melted cream from his face and looked toward Max with calm, unreadable eyes. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't even angry. And somehow, that was worse. The crowd was angry, though. "Hope he gets jail time. He thinks being famous makes him untouchable. Live stream it, Chase. Let the world see him go down." Max felt their voices more than he heard them, the weight of their judgment pressing down on his chest. His mind scrambled for a way, out some angle to flip this, to take back control. "I'll make a video about this," he blurted. "I'll donate to charity or whatever. Just let me go, man. It's not that deep." No response. The officer pushed him into the back seat of the cruiser. The second the door shut, the outside world became muffled, but he could still see the crowd through the window, their phones still pointed at him, still filming. The worst part? He knew exactly what was happening on social media right now. The hashtags, the outrage, the reaction videos from other influencers calling him a garbage human being, and proof that internet clout ruins people. And the views, millions of them. His name was everywhere, but for the first time in his life, Max Carter wasn't trending because people loved him. He was trending because they wanted to see him fall. Max sat in the back of the police cruiser, his wrists burning from the tight cuffs, his breathing shallow. His mind raced, cycling through every possible way out of this mess. He wasn't some criminal. He wasn't some thug. He was Max Carter, the guy who turned pranks into a career, the guy who always found a way to spin things in his favor. This wasn't supposed to happen. The officer slid into the driver's seat, radioing something in a low voice, his tone calm and professional. He didn't even look at Max. He didn't have to. Max's phone, still in his pocket, vibrated against his thigh. A notification, probably thousands of them. He wanted to see what people were saying. He wanted to control the narrative before it spiraled. He turned to the officer, forcing a smirk. "Hey, listen, man, we can work this out, right? It's just a misunderstanding, a prank gone wrong. I'll delete the video, I'll apologize, whatever you want." The officer didn't. "I have a lot of followers, man. I can make this look bad for you if you..." The officer finally turned, locking eyes with him through the cage separating the front and back seats. "You might want to stop talking now." Max's throat tightened. The car pulled away from the plaza, the noise of the crowd fading behind them. But even as they left, he knew his name was everywhere. His mind flashed through possible defenses. Play the victim, say it was all a misunderstanding, claim the old guy was in on it. But none of that would work if the internet had already turned on him. His phone buzzed again. He shifted in his seat, trying to angle his leg to press against the side of the car, hoping to activate the screen without the officer noticing. His heart pounded as he tilted just enough to catch a glimpse of the lock screen. It was worse than he thought. His Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube icons were flooded with notifications. His DMs had exploded. Trending topics flashed across the screen. Hashtag cancel Max Carter. Hashtag justice for the violinist. Hashtag Max Carter arrested. His stomach dropped. This wasn't just backlash. This was a full-scale internet execution. He could already imagine the reaction videos, the drama channels tearing him apart, the news outlets picking up the story. His sponsors would see this. His brand deals. His management. "No, no, no." He leaned, his head back against the seat, his pulse hammering in his ears. He had always chased virality. Now it had turned on him. The car turned a corner, the bright city lights fading into the dim glow of street lamps. For the first time in his life, Max wasn't excited to see his name in the headlines. For the first time in his life, he felt afraid. The police cruiser pulled into the station, its headlights cutting through the dim glow of the parking lot. Max sat rigid in the back seat, his mind a hurricane of panic. His fingers twitched, desperate to grab his phone, to see the damage, to control the story before it spiraled completely out of his hands. But he was trapped, wrists bound, helpless. The officer parked, stepped out, and opened the back door. "Out," Max hesitated. "Look, man, Now." Swallowing hard, he slid out of the car, his legs stiff. The cool night air hit him like a slap, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside his chest. Inside the station, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the gray walls. Officers moved around with quiet efficiency, some barely sparing him a glance. No special treatment, no recognition, just another arrested nobody being processed. A different officer took him from the first, unlocking his cuffs only to replace them with a zip tie. "Hands on the counter," the man instructed. Max obeyed, feeling a wave of humiliation wash over him as his fingerprints were taken. Mugshot next. The camera's flash was cold and indifferent. His whole life revolved around the perfect shot, the perfect angle. And now, this was the picture that would define him, a criminal mugshot. He could already see it plastered on drama channels, in news reports, in reaction videos, dissecting every detail of his downfall. His stomach churned. The officer led him toward a holding cell. Inside, a couple of guys sat slouched on metal benches, barely looking up as Max entered. The door clanged shut behind him, the sound rattling inside his skull. This wasn't a joke anymore. He really was in jail. Max backed against the cold wall, sliding down until he was seated, legs stretched out in front of him. He could still feel his phone in his pocket buzzing like a heartbeat, but he couldn't check it. He could only imagine what was happening outside these walls. What was Chase doing? Had he uploaded the footage? Had the internet fully turned against him yet? No, he already knew the answer. The second his name had started trending, it was over. His followers, the same ones who had worshipped him, were now tearing him apart. His brand deals? Gone. His reputation? Dead. He thought about the violinist. The quiet way he had reacted, the look in his eyes. Max had expected anger, maybe even retaliation, but there had been none. Just disappointment. For the first time since the cuffs had been slapped on him, Max felt something he didn't expect. Shame. He pressed his head back against the cold stone wall and exhaled. The last thing he ever wanted had happened. The world was watching. And for the first time, they wanted him to lose. Max sat in the cold holding cell, his arms resting on his knees, head tilted back against the wall. The air smelled like sweat and disinfectant, a sharp contrast to the polished, high-end lifestyle he usually flaunted online. This wasn't some prank. There were no second takes, no gotcha moment waiting to be revealed. His phone was still in his pocket, vibrating intermittently. The messages wouldn't stop. Each buzz sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through him, like a countdown to his own. Didn't care who he was. One of them, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, glanced at him once before looking away. Another sat in the corner, tapping his foot against the metal bench. Max wasn't their concern, but he was everyone else's. A guard approached the bars and called his name. Carter, bail's being processed. Max's chest loosened with relief. Of course, his management team, his lawyers, someone had to be working to fix this. As he was led out of the cell, he caught sight of his reflection in the glass window by the processing desk. He looked awful. His hoodie was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his usual smug expression replaced by something hollow. The guard guided him through a side door where a familiar face was waiting. His manager, Greg, dressed in a stiff suit. Greg stood with his arms crossed, a mixture of frustration and exhaustion on his face. Max tried to force a smirk. "It took you long enough?" Greg didn't return the expression. "Do you have any idea how bad this is?" Max scoffed, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Come on, it's a prank. I'll apologize, drop a statement, spin it into a redemption. Ark, you know how this works." Greg exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "Max, this isn't one of your stupid controversies. This is assault. It's not just internet drama. There's a legal case, the videos everywhere. News outlets are running with it. Sponsors are backing out." Max's stomach clenched. "Wait, what?" Greg pulled out his phone, turned the screen toward him. The headlines made his blood run cold. Influencer Max Carter, arrested after assaulting elderly street performer. Viral prankster finally faces consequences. Is his career over? Brands cut ties with Max Carter amid public backlash. Underneath, Twitter screenshots flooded the screen, comments tearing him apart, reaction videos hitting millions of views in hours. Max swallowed hard. No, this is way too much. It's just internet outrage. This'll blow over." Greg shook his head. "Not this time." The car ride back was silent. Max's hands curled into fists. He had built his empire off attention. Now that same attention was tearing him apart. Max sat in the back of the car, his fingers twitching against his knee. The city lights blurred through the window, streaking like a glitch in a video file. He wanted to shut it all off. The notifications, the backlash, the way Greg kept shaking his head in silent disappointment. His phone lay face up on the seat next to him, screen flooded with messages. The bold red Twitter trend list still glared. At him, hashtag Max Carter arrested, hashtag justice for the violinist, hashtag cancel Max Carter. Each hashtag felt like a nail in the coffin of his career. Max finally snatched the phone up, unlocking it with shaky hands. His DMs were a war zone. Some old fans begging him to explain, others calling him a fraud, a bully, a washed-up has-been. Then came the sponsors' emails. "Due to recent events, we are terminating our partnership, effective immediately. We do not condone the behavior displayed in the recent viral video and will no longer be working with you." Brand after brand. Deals worth thousands, millions, gone. His stomach churned. He'd had backlash before. He'd ridden the wave of controversy and come out stronger every time. But this was different. Greg exhaled sharply from the front seat. "Max, we need to talk strategy." Max gritted his teeth. "You think I don't know that? I mean real strategy." No fake apologies, no half-assed redemption arc. This isn't just PR damage. It's your entire career on fire. Max clenched his jaw. I can fix this. Greg turned, looking at him with something close to pity. How? Silence stretched between them. Max's mind raced. He could make a tearful apology video talking about learning and growing and how his prank went too far. He could blame stress, blame the pressure of fame, maybe even offer to donate money to struggling street performers. But he could already hear the backlash. He's only sorry because he got caught. Where was this energy before he got arrested? Too little, too late. Nothing would undo what had already happened. He had built his entire brand on arrogance, on never backing down. Now, the same attitude that made him famous was the thing destroying him. Greg pulled the car into an underground parking lot, cutting the engine. He turned in his seat, looking at Max like a businessman staring at a bad investment. You have two options, Greg said. Either you take this seriously, publicly apologize, meet with lawyers, actually change, or you double down and watch everything you built collapse. Max's fingers tightened around his phone. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. And for the first time, he realized something that made his stomach sink even deeper. Maybe he couldn't fix this. Maybe he had hunched over his laptop, scrolling through the wreckage of his career. Every platform, every comment section, every news outlet. His name was everywhere, and not in the way he wanted. He had expected backlash. But this was annihilation. The hate wasn't just from random internet nobodies. Other influencers, some of them his so-called friends, were throwing him under the bus. Some had already made reaction videos, dissecting his downfall, racking up views. Off his failure. Even people who had laughed at his stunts before were now calling him a perfect example of internet arrogance. His stomach twisted as he saw one clip in particular, Chase's footage from that night. The full video, the prank, the moment the crowd turned, the police officer grabbing him. The top comment had over 100,000 likes. The best part is how he realizes in real time that he's not untouchable. Max slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard. Greg sat across from him, watching. You see it now? Max pressed his hands against his face, exhaling slowly. This isn't just a scandal. No, Greg said. It's a reckoning. Max's phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. Sentencing hearing set for next week. Recommend full cooperation. He felt the blood drain from his face. What's the move? Greg asked. Max swallowed hard. I make a statement. Greg nodded. Good, but not some fake, scripted nonsense. This has to be real. If people even think for a second that you're trying to spin this, you're done, for good. Max's pride flared, but what choice did he have? He opened his phone camera, stared at his own reflection. He looked like hell, dark circles under. His eyes, hair unkempt, the usual cocky smirk nowhere to be found. He hit record. Hey, his voice was hoarse, unfamiliar. He swallowed, exhaled. I messed up, not in a whoops, this was a bad joke kind of way. I hurt someone for the sake of content, and I deserve everything coming to me. He paused, staring at the screen. The Max Carter in the reflection looked small. I'm not going to sit here and ask for forgiveness, because I don't deserve it right now. But I am going to say this. This whole thing made me realize something. I built my career off making people feel like they weren't real, just props for content, and now I'm feeling what that's like. And it sucks. Another pause. He blinked. I don't expect people to trust me after this. I don't even know if I trust myself, but I'm going to do what I can to make it right. Silence. He exhaled, then hit upload. The moment the video was posted, his hands shook. The view count climbed instantly. Comments flooded in, some supportive, most brutal. But for the first time in years, Max wasn't performing. For the first time, he was just him. Max sat on his couch, staring at the screen. His video had been live for less than an hour, and the numbers were already exploding. Normally, that would have sent a rush of adrenaline through him, but not this time. The comments scrolled in real time, a chaotic mix of reactions. Too late for this, dude. You're only sorry because you got caught. This actually feels real. Maybe there's hope for him. Nice try, but no one's buying it. Max rubbed his face, exhaustion sinking into his bones. He had said all the right things. He hadn't tried to deflect, hadn't made excuses, hadn't even asked for sympathy, and still, most people didn't care. Greg stood near the window, scrolling through his phone. "It's a start," he said. "The video's getting traction. Some outlets are picking it up, calling it a genuine apology." Max scoffed. "And the rest?" Greg didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. "They don't believe you!" Max clenched his jaw. He had spent years carefully crafting his internet persona, turning himself into a brand, an icon, a personality bigger than life. And now people didn't even see him as a real person. His lawyer's text popped up on his phone. "Sentencing in 5 days. Judge isn't taking this lightly. Prepare for worst-case scenario." Max's stomach turned. Worst case? What even was that? Jail. Actual jail? He had thought maybe a fine, maybe probation, some community service. But if this judge really wanted to make an example out of him, he looked at Greg. "What if this isn't enough?" Greg crossed his arms. "It's not." Max's hands curled into fists. "Then what the hell am I supposed to do?" Greg exhaled, sitting across from him. "You want people to believe you've changed? Then prove it. Not with a video, not with words, with action." Max's mouth went dry. The violinist. He hadn't thought about him since the arrest. Not really. He had been too busy panicking over his career, his reputation. But the man, the one who had stayed silent when Max humiliated him, the one who had watched him get arrested without a single word of satisfaction, he was the one Max had wronged the most, and Max had never even apologized to him directly. Not because he didn't want to, but because he knew deep down that it wouldn't fix anything. But maybe that wasn't the point. Max stood up, suddenly restless. "I need to find him." Greg raised an eyebrow. "The violinist." Max nodded. Greg didn't say anything for a moment, then shrugged. "Good luck." And Max could tell from his tone he didn't think the guy would even want to see him, but that didn't matter. Max had spent his whole life making noise. Now it was time to listen. Max pulled his hoodie over his head, keeping it low as he walked through the plaza. It was quieter than the night of the incident, but people were still around. Tourists taking photos, vendors setting up, couples strolling under streetlights. He scanned the area, heart pounding. He didn't even know the guy's name. He had spent the past year humiliating strangers for views, and now, when it actually mattered, he didn't even know how to find the man he had wronged. He kept walking, nerves buzzing under his skin. His whole body screamed that this was a bad idea, that he should just let it go, let the internet move on, let the sentencing play out. But he couldn't. He reached the spot where the violinist had stood that night. The pavement was empty now, nothing but a dark patch where someone had spilled coffee. No violin case, no quiet music drifting through the air. Max's chest tightened. Maybe the guy had left for good. Maybe his stunt had done more than just humiliate him. Maybe it had ruined him. Looking for someone, Max turned. An older woman stood near a fruit stand, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She had been watching him. He hesitated. "Yeah, the violinist. The guy who plays here." Her expression hardened. "Haven't seen him since that night." Max swallowed. Do you know where he lives?" She scoffed. "Why? You gonna throw something else at him?" The words stung. Max shook his head. I need to talk to him." The woman studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "He plays at the shelter on 9th sometimes. If he's still in town, you might find him there." Max's pulse kicked up. "Thank you." She didn't reply, just turned back to her stand, already done with him. He didn't blame her. The shelter smelled like old books and stale coffee. A few people sat at tables, bundled in worn-out jackets, eating quietly. Volunteers moved through the room, handing out food and blankets. And in the far corner, near a window, the soft sound of a violin filled the air. Max stopped cold. The violinist sat with his back to the room, bow gliding across the strings, playing a slow, somber tune. His eyes were closed, lost in the music. Max's throat tightened. He forced himself forward. The man didn't look up when Max stepped into view. He didn't stop playing. Max felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a moment he hadn't earned the right to interrupt. Still, he swallowed his fear and spoke. Hey! The violinist's eyes flicked open. He met Max's gaze, his face unreadable. For the first time in Max's life, he didn't know what to say next. The violinist lowered his bow, letting the last note fade into silence. His gaze was calm, steady, too steady. It made Max's chest tighten. He had faced outrage, threats, and mockery over the past few days, but none of it made him feel as small as the quiet way this man looked at him. Max swallowed hard. His palms were sweaty. He had no script, no camera to play to, no audience to sway. His voice cracked. He exhaled, trying again. I just wanted to talk. The violinist tilted his head slightly, waiting. He didn't look angry. He didn't look anything. Max shifted awkwardly. I don't know if you even want to hear this, but I'm sorry. The words felt foreign in his mouth. He had faked apologies before. Smoothed over, carefully crafted statements designed to minimize damage and maximize sympathy. But there was no strategy here. Just him, raw, exposed, small. The violinist studied him, then set his bow down across his lap. Why? The single word cut through Max's nerves like a blade. He hesitated. Because I messed up. The violinist nodded, as if he already knew that. And what do you want from me? Max felt his stomach twist. He didn't know. Forgiveness, validation, a way to make this weight go away? He ran a hand through his hair. I don't want anything. I just needed to say it face to face. The violinist was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. You threw ice cream on me. Max flinched at how simple it sounded. How stupid. I did, he admitted. You humiliated me. Max nodded, his throat tight. Yeah, and now your life is falling apart. Max exhaled sharply, gripping the back of his neck. Yeah, the violinist leaned forward slightly. His voice didn't change, but the weight of his words did. You want to know what the worst part was? Max braced himself. What? You didn't even see me as a person. Max felt those words. A way to get clicks. I was nothing to you until the moment it backfired. Max wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't. Because it was true. The violinist let the silence settle between them. Then, finally, he picked up his violin again. I'm not here to give you peace, Max Carter. He lifted the bow. That's something you have to figure out on your own. Then, without another word, he started playing again. Max stood there, feeling something. He hadn't felt in years, not anger, not frustration, just shame. Max stood there, frozen, as the violinist resumed playing. The soft, mournful sound filled the room, but it no longer felt like background noise. It was deliberate, measured, a melody that carried the weight of something Max couldn't undo. He thought about leaving. Walking away would be easier. This wasn't some movie moment where a heartfelt apology wiped the slate clean. The violinist hadn't forgiven him, hadn't even given him the satisfaction of anger. He had just stated the truth, and somehow that was worse. Max swallowed hard. I don't expect you to forgive me. The violinist didn't stop playing. I don't know how to fix this. The song continued, every note stretching the silence between them. Max clenched his fists, then let them go. He wasn't getting an answer. Not here, not from him. For the first time in his life, there was no shortcut out of the consequences. No viral video, no clever edit, no brand deal waiting on the other side. He turned, leaving the shelter without. Another word. The courtroom was colder than he expected. Max sat stiffly in his chair, hands clasped in his lap. Cameras weren't allowed, but he knew the whole world was waiting to hear the outcome. His lawyer had told him to prepare for the worst. The prosecution had been relentless, painting him as a repeat offender of cruelty for profit. The violinist hadn't pressed charges, but that hadn't stopped the court from making an example out of him. The judge's voice rang clear. Mr. Carter, it is clear that your actions were not only irresponsible, but malicious in nature. Your online presence has enabled reckless behavior, and as a result, this court will not treat you as a mere entertainer seeking attention. Max kept his head down, waiting for the final blow. You are sentenced to 6 months of community service, mandatory anger management classes, and a permanent ban from monetizing content on social media for the duration of your probation, the courtroom murmured. Max blinked. That last part hit the hardest. No money, no sponsorships, no revenue from his past content. His empire wasn't just damaged, it was gone. He exhaled, slow and steady. No outbursts, no protests, just acceptance. 3 months later, Max stood in the same plaza where it all started, wearing an orange vest, a trash picker in hand. People recognized him, but they didn't stop for photos. They just stared, whispered, shook their heads. He wasn't Max Carter the influencer anymore. He was just Max. A soft melody drifted through the air. He turned his head. The violinist was back, playing in the same spot. His tip jar sat at his feet, half full. Max reached into his pocket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and dropped them inside. No cameras, no performance, just a moment. The violinist didn't acknowledge him, but this time Max didn't need him to.